So, Garry Hughes, welcome, and thank you very much for coming to join us on Kredd. I've just kicked the camera. Should we start that again? And also start with a
slate.
Could you just describe to the viewers and anyone listening on podcast what these things are behind you? It's like these banks of telephone wires and keyboards, which may give the people listening or watching a sort of insight as to who you are.
Well, this is my home studio on the Welsh borders in the UK, and it represents probably a lifetime's worth of collecting synthesizers mostly, and rummaging through everything from car boot sales to second-hand newspapers, and recently, I guess, online a little bit. And so we have, yes, a whole bunch of synthesizers here, mostly analog ones, but not exclusively. And well, one of them is the very first synth I ever had, an Oberheim OB1, which I had when I was 21, and that's a long time ago now. And there's stuff here by Moog and ARP and EMS, and some pretty well-known instruments, some slightly obscure ones, but so that'll give you the idea that I'm something of a synth geek and a collector, I suppose, but only because I love these things and I use them in my music. They're not museum pieces, you know, they're not here for display, they're here to be used.
Yeah, fantastic. So, have any of these been used on specific records?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, yes, they have indeed. By me and by other people, in fact. I mean, the Yamaha CS80, which is this huge thing behind me here, used to belong to Ultravox, so that was on all of their hits. And I've used these on records by people as diverse as Bjork and Tina Turner, and with Sly and Robbie, and all kinds of people over the last, well, many years that I've been a musician.
That's a really, I mean, just... I'm talking about your instruments there, the array of names, the diversity of names you've just mentioned and artists. Obviously gives an insight into your sort of CV of artists you've worked with, but also the wide range of genres and styles that you've covered. Is there a reason for that? Because a lot of musicians tend to have a sort of pigeonhole, maybe?
Well, yeah, the thing is, I've done a lot of different roles within the music business over the years. I mean, I started off as a musician playing, again, synthesizers, because that was my first love, really, in bands. And I worked with a 1980s British sort of soul funk band called Imagination, who are fantastic. And then I joined an Australian rock band called Ice House, which was partly because I thought they were cool, but also because I wanted to go to Australia, to be honest with you. And then I became a session musician. So when you're a session person, you really, the phone rings and you just literally don't know who might be on the other end. So you do end up working with a very diverse range of talented people. And sometimes you're in a sort of zone that you feel comfortable with. You think, oh, well, yeah, I really dig this kind of music. Sometimes it might be a little more unnerving and you have to just adapt to whatever's comes up on the day, but really, yes, I suppose that is true. I have worked with an awful lot of different people, but I suppose if I had to define my own core personality as a musician, I definitely always gravitate towards ambient music and dub and experimental music, really. And so the two projects I have as a recording musician both reflect that. You know, one of them is called the Bombay Dub Orchestra. It's a kind of Indian epic thing involving up to 78 musicians, recorded in India and the UK. And the other is the complete opposite of the spectrum, which is myself and a friend from New York making ambient music with synthesizers.
Right.
So, and I've also written some music for film over the years and various other things.
But it's funny, you mentioned, like, you know, Imagination or Ice House. It's like, yeah. For most people that would be enough, you know.
Well, yeah, if we go back into sort of thinking about that kind of thing. A famous record producer, Youth, once said to me when I was doing a session for him, well, I said, Youth, have you got any advice? Because I was just starting to trying to get into production at that point, and he said, yeah, don't peak early. So, you know, in a way it was great advice, because for a while I think I got a bit frustrated about doing a lot of session work, and I thought, well, I want to be a record producer. And in a way, I wasn't ready for it then. And it was good that I kept doing sessions, because every week, or sometimes every day, I'd be thrown into a different situation, and I was having to learn how to, not so much because I think you can get confused by the fact that you think a record producer's got to know a lot about technology.
Yeah.
But actually, what you've really got to do is know a lot about how to get on with people and how to get the best out of them.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the personality of the instruments, you know, because you're not sort of genre specific, that you might say your personality of a sort of synth or electronic musician. So the sort of working in certain areas as a session musician, just the personalities involved. Do you think you have to adapt the way you interact and feel in that collaborative setting?
Yeah, I mean, I think every piece of making music, every kind of even if you're working on your own, there's someone else at the end of it who's going to have feedback. You know, I mean, sometimes I write music for TV sometimes, and I might do all the music myself, but at the end of the day, the director, probably sometimes a producer, is going to come back with some comments and say, well, we like that, but it's too busy or something. So there's always a collaboration somewhere. And if you're doing a more traditional recording session and you're in a room with, say, the producer, the engineer, and perhaps the artist, who may or may not be a singer, then there's four people all kind of trying to achieve the same goal. And everyone, generally speaking, I've found that everyone's opinions are welcome. I mean, it's very rarely that anyone's going to not take an idea from someone. Yeah. Even if it's not a good idea, people are quite happy to sort of give it a whirl, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you do have to, I suppose, here's the thing about being a session person, really, partly people are booking you for your personality. I mean, everyone must, I suppose you do have, even if you don't realise it, some stylistic thing that you have. I mean, as a guitarist, maybe, you know, when you're booking a guitarist, you've got something in mind. I mean, it might be broad enough to let them have lots of leeway, but you wouldn't book a heavy metal guitarist on a country record, or would you? Maybe I would. But so I think my taste, if you like, I suppose, is what people used to enjoy, and that I would come in. I'm not a particularly technically very good player. I mean, I can't even read music, not very well, not well enough to do, you know, that kind of session work. But I always got engaged more with sort of a team of people who were trying to achieve something, and the sound was important, you know, so it wasn't just a question of being able to come in, read some music, play the right notes and go home again, which is what you'd want from a string section, you know. You don't want people to start wildly improvising halfway through the score. You know, oh, I've got a jazz idea here, man. You know, I'll just play the ninth there, it'll sound better. But, you know, if you're in a smaller unit where people are trying to get something personal to the artist going, then you are going to be somewhat picked for your ability to provide something unusual. And in my case, that was often maybe just making abstract noises on a VCS3 or something like that, which is probably more valuable than someone coming in with a DX7 and being able to play beautiful boogie woogie or something like that. Yeah,
absolutely. Have you ever been in situations where people are wildly unspecific about what they want?
Yes, I kind of hate those situations, actually. I won't name any names, but a well-known DJ production duo in the 80s who I became very friendly with, and ended up actually going to New York and having some adventures and writing some successful stuff with. When I first worked with them, they'd never really been in the studio. They were great DJs and knew how to fill a nightclub, but they would say things like, well, we need a bass line. And I'd say, well, any idea what sort of sound? They go, well, just give us all of them. Which of course is this was on a remix, I think, and generally their approach was to say, well, give us loads and loads of options. And I'd almost prefer someone to have quite a specific thing. I mean, that's two extremes, right? So somewhere in the middle is probably the right approach. But a little direction is always helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably helpful for any situation involving sort of creativity.
Yeah.
To put some sort of tram lines for ideas to go along.
I know, it is. And I've definitely worked with people who have quite specific ideas of what they want. And in a way, of course, if you're a session guy, and that makes it kind of easier in a sense, in that you can hone something down. But then, of course, if there's no time pressure, and this is part of the factor, is sometimes time pressure, there are the kind of sessions which we've all done, I'm sure, where, you know, it's like we've got 3 hours to do this and we have to do it, or we have to finish this mix by midnight. But if it's a bit more languid and it's spread out over in someone's personal studio where there's no time pressure, people are more likely probably to give you a bit of room to manoeuvre and say, well, look, you know, I've got a few phone calls to make. Why don't you just play around for a bit and see what you come up with?
Yeah.
And I can certainly think of one producer who was very good at doing that, and would then come back in and go, yeah, I like that, which is fine as well, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. But the whole nature of sort of session work within itself has got a sort of precarious aspect to it,
Yeah,
to say the least. So what is it, or what has and what still drives you to embrace that?
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't really done this session work for quite a long time now. I mean, I think I won't say I got exhausted with it, but there came a point where I was starting to feel like I was donating an awful lot of ideas to other people's projects, and that I wanted to kind of take some time off, step back from it, and do my own thing for a bit. And so I did, and that followed moving out of London, where I'd been for nearly 20 years. I wanted to have some more space. I wanted a different lifestyle. My wife and I decided that we would move into the countryside, and I took some time off and just started writing my own music for a bit. And so now, since then, I've kind of been doing, I sort of bounce between doing my own recording projects and doing more of the film and TV stuff, really, which is less exhausting and and a bit more relaxed, really, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But I mean, I decided quite a long time ago I kind of wouldn't do any more touring either. So I have had, you know, like I said, over the years I've done an awful lot of different roles, and certainly the session thing is pretty intensive. I mean, it's quite exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was, you know, a really enjoyable phase of my life, and I was really fortunate to meet and work with a lot of great people. But, you know, and what I do now, more my connection probably with other artists is to do remixes for people. You know, I do quite a lot of, there's a lot of that kind of remix swap thing goes on, where someone sends me some stems and I send someone some stems of some of my stuff, and everyone collaborates in a sort of virtual way.
Yeah.
Not so much fun, actually, to be honest with you. But
is that because that you don't have the face-to-face
well, when you're
interaction?
remixing, you kind of get on with it yourself, really. But I do miss the interaction with other people sometimes, which I think everyone now, I mean, we could talk about this a bit, now that we have the internet and the ability to send stems around the world or sessions around the world, is that there isn't quite so much human interaction. And I think that's something I really, really miss, because there is something unique about being in a room full of people and battering an idea about. And perhaps sometimes having that time pressure.
Yes.
Because there is a thing now where anyone who's got their own studio will recognise that there's a lack of urgency about whether you kind of crack on with it, because it's a nice day and it might be fun to go and sit in the garden or, you know, take the dog for a walk. Whereas in the, you know, the more traditional recording environment, you would perhaps have something like a remix. You might have a day to do it, maybe two. And so it was all hands to the pumps and let's get in there and let's get cracking.
Yeah.
And you might go home at 6 o'clock in the morning exhausted, but you've done it.
Yeah.
Whereas I have been known to drag things out for a bit just because I can.
Yeah. Is it that, and that kind of sort of brings in the sort of aspect of when is a piece of music finished? Because obviously it's a tough question, but obviously, particularly with technology the way it is now, and as you said, if people are maybe self-releasing or they're not under a label pressure to get something out specifically at this time and then go and tour it, and with the way DAWs work, or digital audio workstations, is you've got so many options. You're not working to tape. You can carry on forever.
Yeah. Well, there's two elements to that. One is the carrying on forever bit. Is that I suppose in my case, I tend to just think, well, it's as good as I can make it, so it's finished. Which seems, I know that sounds trite, but actually it's quite a good way of approaching it. I mean, if I still think there's something that can be improved, I'll keep working on it.
Yeah.
If I genuinely can't think of anything else that I can do to make it better, that's for better or worse. I mean, if the composition isn't any good, at some point I'm going to go, that one didn't make it. But what I'll then do is when I get to that stage is I'll leave it for a few weeks if there's no pressure. I just won't listen to it. I'll wander about, I'll do other things, and then I'll come back to it in a few weeks' time, listen to it, and if I still think it's all right, then it's finished, you know. But inevitably, after those few weeks, inevitably I'll want to change a few things, but they'll normally be small things.
Right, okay.
But in a more existential fashion, nothing's ever finished,
Right, yeah.
because even when it's finished, it'll probably get remixed by somebody.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, not every kind of music gets remixed, but certainly the kind of things I tend to get involved with, there's always that potential. So, but that's fun. If you put a record out and then a year later, you get some remixes back from some different people who've done all kinds of interesting things to it, like added beats or sped it up and done something completely left field that you never would have thought of yourself. That's generally really quite rewarding.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and the whole thing, I suppose we have to touch on the business aspect of that. I mean, if you're looking at ways of extending the kind of marketing of your work, having releasing a remix package 9 months further down the line after the record is quite nice, because you've got these different versions. They might pick up some licensing or something. It's a way of renewing interest in the record.
Yeah.
And of course, as we know, I mean, even people's back catalogues of long gone stuff is being exhumed and remixed constantly as well now. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the whole back catalogue thing, because that's even with the almost like the white noise of music available now, of new music that's being made. I don't know what the figures are, but it's a ridiculous amount of new songs uploaded from sort of like the amateur market through to professionals. There's still a big connection and sales and streaming of, for want of a better word, older music made in sort of up to and including the start of like the digital age of the 80s. It's still incredibly popular.
yeah, and not just with old folks like me.
Or me.
No, I mean, I think there's something about I don't know where the cut-off point comes for. There was certainly a point, well, when I was growing up, 70s and then into the 80s, where pretty much everything was being played by real people in a room, you know, maybe not simultaneously, but there was a sense you could close your eyes and think, oh, I can hear the band playing. And then at some point, it became, oh, I can hear Pro Tools, everything's been comped, you know. And so I think maybe people look back with a certain degree of nostalgia, or even interest, because they haven't heard that before, and then read, you know, if they're young now, and it's music that their parents listen to actually, but it's still equally valid and interesting, possibly because it's less perfect. You know, it hasn't been quantized, put in time. All the choruses are different. You know, there's some rough edges, but you can kind of feel the looseness of a band playing together, which is something that's very hard to recreate without a bunch of people in a room. And you know, there's some interesting exercises of, you know, if you take a Led Zeppelin track and listen to it, it's not a strict tempo at all, you know, nor would be, you know, any decent funk track you can name. You know, it's got some movement to it. It's not just, I mean, apart from the wondrous craft work, and you know, many people in the world of techno, where you don't want that to happen because it just sounds bad. In kind of all the other genres of music, you know, it's all about a bit of ebb and flow.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's part of the thing with the way that we listen to and feel about music anyway, because we don't just listen with our ears, do we? We have an imagination of when we're hearing sounds. As you said, you know, you can almost imagine the band playing. So I think that's where there is an attraction to the more sort of face-to-face human interactive collaborative records of yesteryear to some degree, that draws younger people to them still, is because it's probably a more wider palette of imagination, because it's not necessarily the same sound 30 seconds later that you've just heard.
That's right. And also all the studios were very different back then. I mean, you know, especially in the pre-SSL era, I guess, everyone had a different console, they had different rooms, different amps, different mics, and there was this element of performance. You know, that's the thing. I think that people, I think that's what gets people. You know, and especially if there's a vocal involved, which there is in a lot of most music, really, outside of perhaps jazz and, you know, ambient world or whatever. If we're talking about songs, there's something about the performance that people have. I think people have a really good antenna, have a really good ear for authenticity. You know, they can tell. I mean, maybe that's just me, but I can generally tell if someone's really feeling something when they're performing, although of course some people are really good at faking that, but you know, there's a difference between that raw emotion that you get with some artists, especially if they write their own material, I think. There's a huge world of difference between that and a pop record where everything's been auto-tuned and someone is basically just performing in more of a theatrical kind of fashion, you know, like a stage school kind of. I'm talking about what are those TV shows, you know, I don't watch them,
like X Factor,
yeah, all that stuff,
things,
where I don't think you really get any tangible sense of emotion from the performer. It's a bit like going to a West End show, you know, it's very well performed, it's very theatrical, it hits all the right notes and it hits all the right emotional content noises, but really it's flat as a pancake in terms of real feeling. You know, you'd be better off listening to one Leonard Cohen record, you know.
I think maybe it's like that is a different form. That's more sort of like.
I'm maybe just using that as an example as to why people might be drawn to sort of the grungier, rougher, less polished end of music from the 60s and 70s. You know, listen to a James Brown record. That's real. You know, you can imagine the band. I mean, there's no overdubs. I mean, I very much doubt there's any overdubs on most of that James Brown stuff. It's like everyone's in the studio. They probably just come straight from a gig. They're going to slam it down, and that comes across in the grooves, you know. Which is why perennially people love Motown and disco, for that matter. I think, which obviously is a more produced kind of form. It never goes wrong, you know. I mean, I remember I was asked to DJ at a friend's birthday party a few years ago, and I held all these really esoteric mashups and things, which I thought were just really clever and fantastic, and no one was dancing at all. Nobody was dancing for ages and ages, and then my wife walked up with an armful of vinyl, and she put on a Kool and the Gang record, and the whole thing went, oops, brilliant. I shouldn't have done that. And bang, the whole place just went crazy, you know. I was overthinking it.
Yeah, of course. Well, again, it's returns to that sort of collaboration, human interaction, all those sort of things, different people working together. But I mean, that's kind of very audible. It is to me anyway when I listen to like the first 2-3 Public Enemy records, even though there's nothing is being played by a musician, but they were all playing samplers together to try and create a racket that reflected New York at the time.
Sure.
So I think then you'd still get that sort of visual element.
Yeah, it's really raw.
Yeah.
And it's angry and focused and articulate. You know? And I think that's the same thing that punk had going for it as well, because I was I was 19, I think, when Anarchy in the UK came out. And at that point, rock music had got very stale. It was all about big arena gigs with massive light shows and dry ice and pyrotechnics and very long guitar solos and a drum solo, and then you'd go off and have a beer and it'd still be the drum solo, and you know, and then all of a sudden punk comes along, 2 minutes, three minutes at the most, you know, pure energy. And I remember going to see The Damned, and it was just an amazing gig, and everything needed a good shaking up, you know. Which I think I certainly remember hearing that first Public Enemy album. It's just like, whoa, what's going on here, you know. And then, I mean, probably numerous other examples.
Yeah, of course,
Which leads me to also to go off the tangent now, is to say that maybe I think that's why I find a lot of modern records a bit boring, is that it might just be one person sitting at home with a laptop, you know, and then making a dance record. But there's a great many of them out there. Some of them are terrific, I mean, obviously. But I think there's a trap to be had there if you're just referencing yourself and kind of going, well, I like it. I mean, I do that as well. But if you've missed out on I mean, I've had the good fortune over the years of collaborating with loads and loads and loads of people. But if you've never had that experience and you're just kind of starting out, and all you're referencing is maybe stuff that you like and trying to do something along those lines, that's perhaps when you need to get together with somebody else and see what the two of you can do. Yeah.
I mean, even if it's just like a sounding board.
Yeah. Exactly. i.e. someone who doesn't know you really well is going to be scared to say they don't like it.
And it's also maybe a thing as well of people interacting with the space they're in as well, and not necessarily geographically, but we've spoken about this studio will sound different, the equipment in it, the desks and what have you, but obviously with sort of portable laptops, plugins, Dr. Dre beats, headphones. You can kind of make music, or a lot of people make music, and it's to some degree slightly irrelevant at the space they're in.
Yeah, sure.
Which would seem to then take away one aspect of collaboration, even if it's not necessarily human, but it's like maybe the studio space, the environment you're in.
I don't know. I suppose the good thing about working with a laptop and a little keyboard is that you can put it in a rucksack, take it on the tube or on the bus, and go to somebody else and set it up. So there isn't this need to have even a car to transport gear like there used to be, and a big space and a lot of stuff to work with. So I mean, that's a real positive, I think, you know, that it's become incredibly democratic, and that anyone with it, I mean, even with a mobile phone, you can these days you've probably got more powerful synthesizer in your mobile phone than a lot of stuff in this room, you know. So the collaboration thing, I don't know, maybe perhaps people are collaborating in ways that I don't know about as well. I mean, you know, via social media, that perhaps I'm missing out on something there. You know, perhaps I'm being a bit unfair.
So, with looking at sort of the career of being a musician, session musician, producer, remixer, what are the biggest frustrations that you think you've come up against regarding what it is that you would like to do in that situation?
Well, as a recording artist who's got quite extravagant tastes when it comes to working with a lot of musicians, the biggest limitation has been money in the last 10 or 15 years, because the budgets aren't there from record companies at the level I'm working at. I mean, so it's been really hard to... it's very easy to make a record for no money these days. If you want to make a record on a laptop, which you can make a great record on a laptop, obviously. But if you want to work with the string section half the way around, you know, the other side of the world, and you want to work with some really great musicians, those people have got mortgages to pay, and they all have to be paid at a musicians' union rate, and there are airfares involved, and the more elaborate your recording becomes, the more expensive it becomes. So that's actually been a source of frustration. That's why we've only put 3 records out over the last 15 years, is because we've had to save up to do them. So that's a frustration. But then we did choose to, when we started, when I say we, and I mean the project, I'm talking about the Bombay Dub Orchestra, which is on 6 Degrees Records in San Francisco. And it's myself and a London and Mumbai-based composer called Andrew T. Mackay. When we came up with that idea, there was still a bit of money floating around for those kinds of projects. And so on the first record, we managed to just about not go into too much debt. But by the time the second one came around, things were looking, you know, CD sales were in free fall, and we hadn't got the licensing possibilities that we had on the first record. So we had to, you know, find other sources of income, which basically meant channeling money that came in from film and TV projects, or our royalties, or whatever. So it's been frustrating, that, because at some kinds of records just cost a lot of money to make.
Of course,
You know, the more people you want to work with, the more expensive it is.
Get.
You know, and I'm glad people still make extravagant records. I mean, that last Daft Punk album, was rumoured to have cost $1 million to make. You know, but it certainly sounds like they spent the money in the studio. You know, so that's been a frustration. Generally speaking, I haven't ever felt really artistically frustrated. I mean, there's been when I was doing sessions, inevitably there were a few that I felt that I either wasn't the right guy for the job, or that they didn't like what I was doing. But that's bound to happen. And you know, if you over X amount of records and time, you know, that's. I mean, you know, I did one record with a very, very, very famous star of the '60s, and spent 3 months in Los Angeles just pulling my hair out, and it just didn't really work. I mean, it just didn't work. You know.
Was that on a personality clash, or was it like a musical?
No, it wasn't really. Yes, it was. But no, mostly, I mean, I think you've got to keep an open mind and try and be, you've got to be a bit of a team player in these situations. I mean, you can't go in as a session person. I mean, there's a sort of hierarchy on these things, you know. There's the artist, that's their record, they're the one with the vision that you have to try and help them fulfill. And then there's the producer, and then mostly there's the session people, and there's or members of the band even. If there's a band involved, it's a different thing, because you have to slot yourself in there.
Of course,
And kind of, I've done that with a band who might have been together for years, and all of a sudden the producer's bringing me in as a keyboard player, and that can be uncomfortable, especially if there's already a keyboard player in the band. So you have to be pretty low key and just try and work out what everyone wants, and not try and start. That's the point you don't start throwing in the great production idea or telling the singer they're flat. That was out of tune. There's the door.
Not advisable. No.
No. Definitely. The part of collaboration is to know when to just keep quiet and just kind of occupy your sort of moment in the record.
With obviously the music industry went through really sort of rocky time, particularly from all sides, apart from people who were listening to music, but actually people making it from the sort of business enterprise side, to sort of yourself and me, people making records. It's kind of stabilised to some degree now, when the whole sort of piracy has turned into streaming. People still listen to music for free, but sort of on the other side of it, a lot more people are now going to see bands.
I think that's
the artists.
That's if you're prepared to get out on the road and tour, then yes, that income that you've lost probably through record sales may well come back from that angle. And interestingly, I think people have got very canny with things like merchandising, because I remember I did a remix for a band called Juno Reactor, who are sort of early proponents of the whole kind of techno thing, and they're great actually, and they do a lot of festivals, and they do a lot of touring. But I was talking to the guy, and I'd just done a remix for him, and we were just chatting about things, and he said, "Do you know what annoys me? I can spend an afternoon designing a T-shirt, and people are happy to pay £20 for it, but I spend 6 months on an album, they don't want to pay a penny for it." So once you've accepted that maybe that's the state of play, that people are happy to pay for a concert ticket or a festival ticket or a T-shirt, then it's up to you to work out how to sell the T-shirts. I haven't worked that one out yet. I've got a big box of them upstairs. You can have one if you want.
I'll give you 20 quid for it. But it's funny, because it's not like people have fans of music, consumers of music, and it's not that they don't value it, but then they're valuing it on a time with the artist live, I think, instead of valuing it, I'm going to give you my money for something you've slaved over for a long time.
Well, that's right, and that's, as I said, if you're prepared to get up off the sofa and go on the road, then it's probably totally cool. And I would have happy. I mean, I had such a great time being on the road. From about the age of 21 to about 26. That's when I met my wife, and I realised that being on the road for 11 months of the year was not a happener. Plus, I was getting a little bit to the point where I really wanted to be in the studio and discover that side of it. And, I was very intrigued by that. I mean, if you're young and enthusiastic, the world's your oyster. And I think for some of the older artists as well, people of my age group, who've got an established fan base, those people are roughly the same age as the artist, i.e. sort of my age. They're really happy to shell out good money for a ticket to go and see Steely Dan or the Eagles or whoever it is that they like from that era. Because, generally speaking, it'll be a really well put together show, and you can hear all your favourite old tunes,
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you're currently working on? Yeah,
at the moment I mentioned briefly an ambient electronica project which I'm doing with my friend Harvey Jones, who lives in Manhattan. Harvey and I have known each other. He's originally from Birmingham, although he's lived in New York for 30 odd years. And we originally met in our 20s, and he's another synth geek, self-confessed. Got a habit. I can't have too many. And for years we kept saying, well, we should do a record together, because we both just love noodling around on synths. And eventually, about 5 years ago, we finally we had a window where I could go to New York for a few weeks, and we just went to the studio and we kind of looked at each other and said, well, what is it then? And then at that point we thought, well, we'd have some rules, and we both like ambient music, so we said, let's have no beats, no acoustic instruments, no vocals, it's just going to be synths. And so something started to emerge, and we ended up calling ourselves the Delia Derbyshire Appreciation Society, which had become a nickname for the two of us, because we'd go off and talk about spring reverbs and filters and things. And amazingly enough, what is not really a very commercial record at all, but 6 Degrees in San Francisco, who do the Bombay Dub Orchestra records, were kind enough to release it. And strangely enough, it got noticed. And we've had well over 2 million streams on Spotify, and we did a second album which likewise attracted quite a lot of college radio. You know, there's an audience in America for this kind of thing that really, I mean, short of trying to get it on Radio 6, who don't seem to be interested, there's not a lot of platform on radio for that kind of thing over here. They're quite long pieces. A lot of the time, nothing much happens. But what does happen is very crafted. And so I'm working on the third record with them. There is a fourth Bombay Dub Orchestra record as well, which again is about 2/3 of the way through. And also just some media work at the moment, which is just did something for the BBC last week. So, you know, those kind of little jobs kind of come through and they just keep things ticking over.
Yeah.
That's what's on at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. Can I want to close with 2 questions. One's really difficult and one's really good. Okay. You don't have to answer the difficult one. Can I have the difficult one first? Yeah, you can have the difficult one first. What would you, career of making music, what would you describe as the lowest point musically or creatively?
Playing in a nightclub band in my early 20s. For people who, you know, had no interest whatsoever in what the band was playing. No interest. The most interesting thing that would happen of an evening was possibly a fight would break out. Okay. That was pretty soul-destroying.
Yeah.
But
then to contrast that with a nice question, what would you describe as your high point musically in all these amazing things that you've done?
Yeah, do you know, I don't really have a high point, I don't think. I've had a lot of really great moments. On a personal level, as a sort of composer, I would say that the first Bombay Dub Orchestra record, going out to Bombay, not knowing what was going to happen, working with a 28-piece string section and having it all fall into place without any problems and actually sound great. And then having all the musicians kind of stay after the session because they wanted to listen to what we were doing, and spending 2 or 3 weeks in the studio with some incredible soloists and singers, and just to hear something that you kind of conceptualized, agonized over, and indeed remortgaged your house to make, be successful, and, you know, right the way through to having it mastered by Bob Katz. That's incredibly rewarding.
That's pretty cool, to be fair. It is that moment of the realization of everything just coming together, which is what drives us on to make music, and the whole collaboration involved of all these things coming together.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't really get better than that.
Doesn't get any better than that. No. Especially if it's something you've written as well. I think it's really important, because there's a vindication there that, yeah, that was worth doing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.